1 second. Oh. Hi, welcome to another edition of WCM's Outdoor Hospitality Update, and I'm Ben Quiggle, editor of Woodall's Campground magazine, and with me is my esteemed co-host, Mike Gast, uh, writer with RVTravel.com and former vice president of communications at Campgrounds of America
Hi, everybody.
Incorporated. And then joining us today is Eric Stumberg, which, if anybody goes to a lot of the conferences or is involved in the industry for a while, I'm sure you've heard of Eric Stumberg, from CEO and founder of Tengo Internet. And you're celebrating 20 years this year, right, Eric?
That's correct. So
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Can you believe it was 20 years ago when you founded the company? I guess, does it seem like it was that long ago?
So my birthday was yesterday and I turned 55 and I was like, whoa, I've spent almost, So I was, so I had a great reflecting about how long it's been, but it doesn't feel that long ago. But in 2002 is when we started. And at that time there was 3 RV parks in the country that had Wi-Fi and everybody else said they didn't need it. So just to know kind of what the starting gates were. So
I can't even imagine how the technology's changed, because in 2002 I wasn't even thinking about Wi-Fi. I don't think, from where I was at in my life, and just how prevalent Wi-Fi has become. It must be amazing how much has changed since when you started.
yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous number of underlying technology and design improvements, but I think the biggest change, Ben, is that uh, the conception that people wanted to disconnect when they were traveling, and
Yeah.
therefore versus now people want to stay connected, in that sense. And I think that's driven a lot of the changes in kind of amenities and hospitality, right?
Yeah, and
Eric, you and I were talking a little bit today before we started with, reflecting back on 20 years. We were both in the business back then,
Mm-hmm.
and I was on the communications and marketing side when Wi-Fi started to gain a foothold a little bit, and it was a very frustrating, chicken and egg sort of existence there for a while. It was very difficult to market Wi-Fi because the expectations of the guests were so out of line with what the product could actually be. And so it was no surprise that you kind of got a cold shoulder from campgrounds, because it wasn't like building a swimming pool that everybody knew their expectations was. It was really the bane of the existence of campground owners for a long time. I know
Yeah,
there's a question in there somewhere.
I think there's a question in there. Let me find it. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in there, because I would say that when we kind of started out, the guest experience was dial-up, and what we were
yeah,
trying to better was the fact that I had to go to an office, right, and go into some type of room and plug my modem in and then dial up. And if I could essentially do that for my site, that's the big win, right? Um, and so I think, right, what's been driving behind that, Mike, is really tracking about, well, what do people want, kind of an at-home experience? What's the real experience that people want, and what's the expectation that people carry? And I think, you know, we've done a lot better job of really saying this is actually what guests want now, or travelers want. And you know what I'm saying? And so I think that tracking we've been a lot, the last 10 years has been more around what do they want? And let's track that and try to meet that.
It
So,
seems like you
yeah.
were coming real close to the meeting the expectation a few years ago, and then Netflix came along and blew the whole thing up
Mhm.
again.
Yeah, I would say, so when we looked at kind of, I'd say, two big changes. And so one was just the devices that people carried. The biggest one we saw was going from, like, it's the desktop, right, to the laptop, and now from laptop to a phone. And how do you design networks that I can connect to from a phone? And then what you're talking about, Mike, is now what am I going to do? And the whole trend of streaming, right? And now I'm getting my entertainment that way, and now even more than
Mhm.
that, I'm doing business that way, right? And I'm going to school that way, and so I think the delivery of that content, the streaming, has been the thing that's driving us even now, both the devices and what I'm going to do, and
Well,
how much more important it is now.
yeah, and then you have the advent of the cell phone too. I mean, 20 years ago when you first started, I don't think cell phones were anywhere near what they are now, and obviously we have social media. And I
Mhm.
like, yeah, so we were going to dive a little bit into your 2022 State of the Industry report, which
Mhm.
hasn't quite been released yet, but you've were willing to give us a little bit of a sneak peek. And I noticed over 50% of the devices uh, that people, cell phones are over 50% of what people use. And I think it's even more than that. I'm not very good at math, but it's just amazing, you know, and you have multiple ones of those at the park. So,
Right.
and they all demand Wi-Fi. So, I mean, that's got to have changed expectations too, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's about 65% of the devices are phones, right?
Yeah.
And then and then sub phones, right? And now we're looking at the other things that people bring: smart boxes, smart TVs, gaming
Yeah.
systems, their own cameras, right? That type of thing. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a social world out there, and people definitely want to connect. And I know when I first started working at Woodall's, just about 6 years ago, uh, when you spoke with park owners, they would be like, "Oh, people want to disconnect," like what you said earlier. And it's not it's not that way anymore. They definitely want to share that experience, and you've got to be able to provide them a way to share those experiences, I guess, right?
yeah, I think that's probably what, I think if we talked about, oh, when people travel, they want to share their experiences of traveling. And that was part of I guess the case that say for Wi-Fi or any type of connectivity. Um, and now it's just people don't want to disconnect, right? Because there's so
Yeah.
much of their relationships, the entertainment, and the things that are important to them to do are they'll do all the time, right? Versus not do while they're traveling. In addition to saying, "God, look how awesome this place is." Yeah, so
Yeah.
Back in the early days, Eric, there was scratch off cards. There was secret codes that people had to pay extra for. Is that all gone away now? Is it just an amenity like a swimming pool that a campground just has to have?
um, I I think it's an amenity that campgrounds need to have, um, or need to say, or need to speak specifically to it. But in terms of like, do I pay a premium for it, or is it built into my rate? I still think there's openness around that. Um, I think the KOA reports, Mike, were, hey, people expect something free, and people want to have like some type of premium service. And some properties, they're saying, you know what, we're just going to go premium, and it's free. And some are saying, we're still going to tier that. But I think all the consumers are saying, I would like that, right? I would want that, my expectation to be met. So,
I think it's important for the consumer. This stuff's not cheap. I think people assume that you just get a Wi-Fi system and maybe you plug it in and forget about it, but it's
mhm.
not necessarily the case, right, Eric? I mean, it can be a little expensive to upkeep and keep the Wi-Fi going properly.
um, I think it's so. I'm looking at Mike's face to see what he says when I respond. So I'll check on you next time. But I do think that as we started out, that Wi-Fi was like a pool, or it
Yeah,
was like some type of fixed thing. And once I bought it, I was fine. And I do think what's changed is it's a service, right?
yeah,
And just like any service, there's different components of how do I deliver service, and that whole solution has to be managed, right? The internet circuit that's coming to the property that supports, right, the property, um, the the coverage, right, and the equipment that's supporting that, and then anytime, right, somebody has a problem, and I think Mike and Ben, what we do see, and this is probably not any different, um, is if there's any problem connecting, it's not the guest that's the issue, right? It's always the operator, right? It's the property until you solve otherwise. And so that's really, so those pieces of like delivering a great service and a great experience. And when it's not great, making sure that we're helping to get it great from the guest side and any type of support side are even more important, right? Because I thought, hey, I put it in, I don't have to worry about it anymore, right?
Yeah.
So
Another big thing during my time at KOA was the consumer satisfaction scores. We monitored that quite closely, and when I started back in 2020, there really wasn't, or 2000, there really wasn't much call to ask about Wi-Fi. There really wasn't much there, and then it became this thing that started to really affect the campground satisfaction scores. And it became the huge negative for most of my time there nobody was ever up to par. Nobody was ever saying, "Oh my God, the Wi-Fi was just stellar," and was if it was good enough, it was a non-issue to the user. It was never, "Oh, this is the best. I'll come back because it was the best Wi-Fi ever." If it was good enough, that met their expectations. If it was less than good enough, it was a terrific negative. Do you think the expectation level of campers has changed over time?
I think that's what's been increasing. I mean, we'll go back to the state of the industry report, which was what we've been doing for 6 years. I guess was a response to saying, people were like, something was changing, right? And we were trying to say, and it wasn't a Tango issue, right, necessarily, or a specific vendor issue, but there was an expectation that's been changing, and trying to capture, this is what people want, and how do we map what we have to what people want? And I think that's a reason why we were doing this survey, just to make sure that the expectations were clear. I mean, Mike, I'll tell you, so that's been one of the big changes from COVID. There's already been this trend around people wanting streaming and wanting more devices and going and Netflix, right, and not buying cable. So all that's been happening for the last 5 years or 6 years, and probably more than that. And you can see that in some areas. But it really got accelerated in COVID, and a lot of the new entrants were millennial, right, and Z, and which have a much higher technology threshold. So I think the expectations just took another jump. And so what you had last year, so that's probably what's been seeing in our survey is, what we thought is, 30% of campgrounds now meet those expectations, right? And whether that's a KISS score or your NPS or whatever, but that's what we're seeing. And now, and based on what we think guests want and what we think is being offered, right? And so how do you make that higher, or how do you improve the gap of expectation setting, right? Because right now, there's a lot less people, I think it's, I was looking at it, but it's about 11% of properties say something other than Wi-Fi or free Wi-Fi. And so if 100% of people want this, and you've got 11% of people that are saying something, and only 30%, right, can meet, you're going to have a lot of negative reviews, right? Because I got surprised, right, negatively. So
what's the investment level? Is that changed a lot over the years as far as the campground owner is concerned?
In terms of for Wi-Fi in general?
Yeah, just getting set up from soup to nuts, or the upgrades.
It's gone up a little bit, simply but for the devices, right? As the smaller the devices were, it was just requiring more coverage, right, to connect inside of people's RV, those smaller devices. We generally will tell people, when you're building something new, or you're retrofitting an existing property, about what they can expect to spend. That went up a little bit. That went up based on a higher service level that people want, and a little bit of, so that's probably the main thing that's driving it. And then there's the circuit costs, right? So that's the other piece. And those have been going down. So I would say there's a little bit of uptick in the capital costs, or if you're leasing, there's a downtick in the circuit, right? And then your ongoing support. So,
boy, you don't really hear about a lot of things going down in price right now. So that must be nice.
Yeah, we're telling people right now, there's a lot of fiber vendors out there, right, that are trying to keep customers, right, and
Oh,
and
that's
and so it's good to have competition is good. We talked a little bit about it, and looks like there's going to be there's a couple of more um, options, right, for people that are looking for good circuit, right, from a fiber standpoint. We just talked a little bit about Starlink, kind of the new it girl of the connectivity phase, and that everybody's been waiting for the debut. And there's some 5G stuff that's interesting, and providing people more options, right? So
when I know when we've spoken previously, well, I talk with campground owners and we talk with the reservation system providers and Wi-Fi providers, and you guys are all staying extremely busy. I think last summer when I talked with a bunch of Wi-Fi system providers, I mean, you guys, I imagine Tango Internet's been extremely busy. And the campground owners are investing in Wi-Fi. Do you expect those that satisfaction scores to go up now over the next few years, since more owners are realizing the benefit of investing in that?
yeah, if I look at, I mean, we're seeing a couple of booms, right? There's probably no more new properties that are being developed than I've ever seen. And when we talk to you about like the Wi-Fi or connectivity
Hmm.
from that standpoint, um, very high experience that people are asking to be designed in. And so that's really exciting. So these new builders are like, it has to be great, because that's what, Mike, to your point, that's one of the pillars of the amenity of their offering, and charging higher rates, right? Is it needs to be a premium. And so that's exciting. Um, I think with the upgrades or retrofits of existing, so I was thinking about like, what should I see is like, you'll probably see kind of less complaints, right? I don't know that everybody's going to rave. You don't, to your point, Mike, it's just
Mhm.
like, yeah, that was great. Or it worked,
Yeah.
and so, but if it doesn't, it's a high negative to say. But I think you'll have, with the new investments, you'll see better expectation. You'll see those expectations met. And
And
so,
and
So
you
the
and
Go
you
ahead, Van.
mentioned, yep, and you mentioned with a lot of these new developments, they're actually doing dedicated hookups right at the pedestal level, right, to where they can just plug right into the fiber and skip the Wi-Fi, I guess.
yes. So we're trying to see, so for some people that are developing new, the question, right, is, hey, if I'm doing something now, how long is it going to last? And so am I wanting,
Yeah.
internet for the next 5 years? Am I wanting it for the next 10 years? And if you think about, Mike, when we went back, it's like, if I want an at-home experience, well, the way you deliver an at-home experience, right, is you'll put a wire to your pedestal, and then I plug in and I'm at home, right? And so, and with that, you can deliver, you can continue to deliver at home 100 meg. You can go a lot faster and over a longer period of time. And so, for some people, they're like, yeah, I'm investing for the next 15 years. And so that's generally those developers are, and I want, some type of wire to the pedestal where I can have an at-home experience for my guests, right? And Wi-Fi, right? If that's the way they want to connect.
So we've got a changing face of ownership, I guess, right now. We've got a lot of bigger players coming in, a lot of new money and a lot of new investment. And I'm sure that's great for the expense that when people buy an existing campground and see that it needs an upgrade and they've got their revenue and the investment to back that, great
Mhm.
thing. But what about the small mom and pop campground out there that maybe either held off getting into Wi-Fi at all so far, or it's just dipped their toe into it a little bit? Is there still room out there for a mom and pop to have a good internet, good Wi-Fi?
I mean, Mike, I was thinking about it. My first customer, and I don't know if you remember, was a guy named Jim Rowley, um, Lone Star, right? And
Mhm.
so, man, I remember him, right? And he owned one property, right? And he had two sons that were working in his business. And so, um, when we started that year, there were three RV Wi-Fi companies, right? So I think the two answers are, um, there is something, right, for I think there's something for everybody. There is a solution there. And one of the solutions could be, Mike, that's like, hey, we're not going to meet that expectation. I've seen people like, if I have to have satellite or if I have to have this, it's not going to be great. So I'm just going to have a hotspot in the office, and that's okay. And I put, and so I think there are always options, right? I think what we tell people, if it can't meet the expectations, then let's make sure we set right expectations for the people who are, for our customers, right? And if we can do that, then that's one mitigation, So
And I think that's a really great point, because I still talk with a lot of campground owners at conferences who say, hey, I'm way out in the middle of nowhere and I just can't get the streaming Wi-Fi out to everyone. But not people do want to stay connected, but if you're upfront about what you have at the park,
Mhm.
and people will come into your park with that expectation that, hey, I'm probably not going to be able to watch Netflix, but that's okay.
Mhm.
Versus the other way, where if you don't set that expectation, they're like, well, why can't I watch Netflix? And then they get angry. So it is, that's why it's so important to set those expectations, I guess.
And the other side of that are the campgrounds that are making this big investment and do have rock solid Wi-Fi. You mentioned, Eric, that we've got the pandemic has really changed the face of the camper out there, and so we've got people out there that are wanting to work from their rigs now, and that they
Mhm.
want to be on the road full time and work from their rigs, and they're demanding. They have a certain minimum in their head that they have to have, and so it's really become a marketable tool for campgrounds that make the big investment to have rock solid Wi-Fi to market to those folks that have to have it and can't afford to be disappointed. They're running a business.
Yeah, exactly. And you're seeing also some of that premium view and some of the glamping units, right? So I was thinking, Mike, so that's the big thing we homeschooled, right? In the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was traveling with my family, which I've done, and I couldn't do school, I couldn't travel with my family. And so I'm like, it's like the hair club for men. I'm not only the president, but I'm a customer, right? And so,
Neither one of us are customers of that.
you know what I'm saying? But it is critical, because if I'm making my plans and now I'm a consumer who works from, schools from, or from whatever, and I can have that met, then I can vacation, or I can work from here or school from here and do things. When Mike, I was telling one thing, and Ben, we had a property where, vacation rentals, right? Big growth area and what's happening for an entrance, but somebody was staying in a vacation rental for 3 months. So think about that. And it needed a dedicated modem, right? For them to be able to do their work. And so, a property manager was like, hey man, this is a $10,000 customer. If I can get the signal inside this vacation rental, right? This cabin. And we're like, yeah, okay, well, we'll do it, because it was totally worth it, right? For this one customer at that such a high margin value, right? That needed business class service, right? Inside their unit. And so the economics are there for a lot of for those properties and those types of units or product that's out there. In addition to, I'm a small business owner, Mike. So to your point, like, man, our goal is to connect people for success. So if an owner comes to us and they have 50 sites or 20 sites, I want to be able to help them. And that might not be us, that might be someone else, or we'll try to figure out a way, because, that's part of the mission, right? Is to connect people for success in that way. So,
Yeah.
So we talked about all of our good friend Elon Musk and what he's doing with Starlink. And
yeah.
is that a disruptor to the entire industry? Is that something that's going to change everything if it works? I know I've got a lot of readers out there in RV travel who have been RVing for a long time and probably swore at some point 10 or 15 years ago that they would never have. They didn't care about Wi-Fi, and all of a sudden they care, and all of a sudden it is something that they've reluctantly said, I've got to be connected at all the time. And so they're watching this. They don't understand what Starlink is necessarily, or what the ins and outs of it are. But if it works, they might make the investment if the price is right.
Yeah. I think it's so if I was looking back over the last 20 years and kind of what were the the circuit or connectivity advancements, right? And we think about like we went from GPRS in phones to 3G and then to 4G and then to 5G, right? We've had HughesNet, right? We've had Viasat, and we've had a number of different satellite launches that have come out. And there's Modisat's been around a long time, Mike, right? And for people who wanted their own connectivity. So I think it's a disruptor in one sense, right? But people carry phones around right now, although most of those phones have some type of tethering capability, right? And I don't see it as disruptive. I think it's actually gonna solve a niche that for some people who it doesn't work great for, now they have a solution. And whether that's a business operator, right, an operator that has an alternative satellite, you can't get it, or whether that's someone that's living in an area, a full-time RVer or a seasonal RVer, right, that wants that type of dedicated connectivity, it will solve that for them. So I think the pie is getting bigger, and I think that's another slice of the pie that will help.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems to be pretty interesting. I know some park owners were really interested in it. Obviously, the more remote you are, the harder it is to do some of this stuff. And maybe it offers more access for really remote properties, I guess. Yeah.
I think so. I mean, what is it? Is it Fiji is on Starlink right now? Because I think their 5G network got disabled by a solar flare. But for us, we have 3 employees, right, that signed up, right, and we're the first technology movers, and we're testing it in our office to see how it works with business class service. So, it'd be something that we could commend to somebody. And something, but we can say, but it works like this, right? So I'm excited for it, right? Because it's going to help a lot more people that the other solutions that are out there don't serve. So
I noticed in the report too, another interesting nugget was the cable TV, and you mentioned in the report it's dropped from 88% to 26% of new properties in 2021 installed cable hookups. I mean, I guess you could kind of see this coming with the way streaming is, and a lot of people cutting the cords at home. I have to imagine there's some campground owners that are out there going, "Yes, I don't have to pay for this cable anymore."
Yeah, I mean, Mike, we were talking about, and Ben, the consumers are streaming and they're getting their own content over the top, right? And it's their own service, and as we're seeing this kind of new owner, right, that's building, or even a lot of people that are building for a demographic, they're like, well, my demographic wants really fast internet, and they'll grab their own content, right? And so in some sense, people are trading the programming fees of cable TV, right, for a faster internet service, right, for everybody. And so, but it's most acute when in these new properties, right? And like, well, what do you want to provide? What do you want to provide to your guests? And 26% of them are saying, I need cable TV, and the rest are going, I don't need that, not for the next 5 years, right, or next 10 years. So that's not who my customer is.
Yeah.
So Eric, embarrassingly, I don't think anybody knows exactly how many private and public campgrounds are out there. You throw numbers around like 8,500 and 9,000. And do you have a feel at all for what percentage of campgrounds out there have Wi-Fi now, and what percentage don't? I know that's a wild guess for you, but
well, gosh, I remember talking to like Good Sam in 2005 or 6, when I was early in the business, going, how many private campgrounds are there? And I don't, and then, well, what's a campground? Does it include, like, if you have a plug in the back of a gas station, is that a campground? I think it's a lot. So I would probably say it's in the 80 to 90%. And I have to go with, so are you in a directory, right? Or if you're in some type of listing. But I think if you're operating that maybe as a primary business, and that's the primary thing, then it's going to have something. Hotspot,
Yeah,
Everybody
it's
has something, right? And
yeah,
so,
that's a great point. It's become even more complex with the harvest hosts of the world and the tenter type organizations where you can sign up and just have a spot or a spot or two on the back of the property,
yep.
and all of a sudden that's a campground, and all of a sudden those folks are probably going to have that same question being asked of them, even if I've got 2 acres in the back that I down by the river that I've got a couple of spots at that people can dry camp, and the first question is going to be, well, do you have Wi-Fi?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I look at is like most people that we talk to, they have something, right? And the question for them more, Mike, is that, hey, I have a hotspot in my office. Is what's the feasibility of me meeting this new expectation? And sometimes it's not feasible technically, right, Mike? Because there's no internet that can support that streaming level, right, for
Mm-hmm.
everybody, or it's just so expensive to deliver that it doesn't make sense for that business. So I don't know anybody said we're not doing anything. What I've heard is come to the office, right? And generally you can use an office hotspot,
Mm.
but I
What
haven't heard nothing.
what about the manufacturers? Do you work closely with the RV manufacturers at all as to what they're putting into these rigs and how they're constructing them to make it a little bit easier for Wi-Fi?
Yeah, so I think you're talking about, so there's two pieces of that, I think, Mike. Like one is the so one is a little bit like what we see with the manufacturer with park models, right? What's the technology package that's going to be inside of these RVs and homes of the future? And I think, just like cars, now they have their own. Hey, you can buy your own hotspot, right, and your own Wi-Fi. Um, I can see that would be a future, or at least what we talk about is there are add-ons to add some type of extenders that can connect to any type of network. And so we are seeing more of that over the last couple of years, where there's some vehicles that have that as a standard, or some RVs as a standard to say, this will help you connect right to the best signal that's out there. And the best signal that's out there might be our Wi-Fi. It might be 5G, right, or LTE, or it might be something else. So did that
Yeah.
help, Mike, or was that
Yeah.
I think I was trying to land that one with you, and yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
And I guess just taking a look at, you mentioned the park models, I
Mhm.
guess, and I think part of what you mentioned in the report is also just the density of what you need because, mobile devices require closer access points. And then when you look at cabins, you're looking at creating access points inside of a cabin, correct? And
Mhm.
then, they've got to build the right density, I guess, right? Does it take a lot more density than it used to create a good Wi-Fi
Yeah, it's kind
to
of
be able to
like, yeah, because what they tell you, like, there's best practices. You're trying to find the weakest device in your property, whatever you think the weakest thing is going to be, and you're designing a network that's going to connect that device. So if my weakest device, right, is a smart TV and an Airstream, right? So think about that, right? So
Mhm.
it's going to require a lot of effort to solve that versus it's a iPad, right, or it's a cell phone or something like that. But regardless, um, it's they're more dense, and so it says, okay, if in 2014 the density was 1, and then in 2018 we said it's going to be 1.1, right, of that, so it's 10% more, and now you're looking at maybe 20% more access points, right, than maybe 6 years ago. Does that help with the density? And it's generally per, it's a
Yeah.
number of sites covered per, but that's probably the increment, which turns into what's a really good signal inside of someone's RV that can connect to my device, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I guess we mainly focus on private parks here, but I guess looking towards the public park sector too, what have you been noticing as far as public parks maybe getting Wi-Fi, I guess?
Yeah, so we probably serve more municipal, and we serve some state park systems, so not federal.
Hmm.
We serve some concessionaires. But in terms of pure, it's an amenity. And what we're seeing in a lot of state park systems is the park systems are basically providing their own service as the circuits become available. Like we have a park system in the Southeast, and we started out, they had like, I don't know, 30 properties. 25 of them were satellite based, right? Because that was the best connectivity. And as fiber has come down the highways and now they can connect fiber connections, right? Then they're taking it over into their own IT groups, right? Because now they can manage it with their, park rangers and everything else. So, and I think so I think it's the same amenity stack that they see before. There's also some safety benefit and some of the federal and state systems have more of a rural, what we can be considered rural broadband component to that. So, but they're doing it. They're spending money on it, and there's money to spend right now with a lot of the acts that have been passed in the last 3 years.
So, Eric, you've got a company with a long history, but how has Tengo Internet changed in the last 2 years with this explosion of interest and this new wave of both campground construction and people changing hands? All of a sudden, this industry got a lot bigger. Is Tengo Internet growing too to match that?
Yeah, in terms of, so I would say, right after, so one, as we've talked about, there's new campgrounds being developed. So we're having to grow in terms of a lot of the project management aspect, not just to walk. So now instead of coming on site and retrofitting something, those projects are 9 months, 10 months, once you're digging.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're much longer, and they require more coordination with the general contractors, electrical contractors, and ever. So from a professional services or project management, that's more of a requirement, right, for these jobs. So we've had to staff for that. I think we've had to, so after and initially in COVID, lots of new entrants, which much higher expectations on the service. So the support, and so add that plus, if I'm bringing, I think 4 devices into a property, so the support per site, if you look at it, has gone up, simply because people are bringing more devices, and if one of them doesn't work, right, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So now instead of my person with my desktop, I've got, I'm sitting here, I've got my phone next to me, right? I've got my iPad, and all of them have to work, or I did not have a good experience. So our support, our call center, Mike, has had to, we've had to staff that up. A lot more training on the other browserless devices, smart TVs, gaming consoles, and all that, and how to help guests connect to those. So some of the training requirements and additional staffing have changed. The other thing that was weird, Mike, is like when the border was closed, a lot of formerly seasonal properties, right, who had one customer for 6 months, had a tremendous amount of turnover. And so that created the same type of, like, some of the ways that we forecast, calls changed just because there's a lot more site turnover. And so you need more staffing, right, to support that. So from a support standpoint, a lot. From a project management of new development, we've had to invest in that. And from a, education and design and monitoring of existing customers to tell them, hey, this is what's really happening at your property. So we've invested in more kind of account planning and monitoring, right, of your existing properties, so that you're, not behind. That's what most of the customers are like, hey, what's happening? And it's like, oh, your circuit's at 80% or it's 90%, or you had 500 people on. So I guess so we've invested to grow, but we've also invested just to better serve, right? Because that's been, I think we're looking at people want next level right now, right, for their existing properties and their customers and for what we're doing next. And so we're having to invest in that kind of next level.
What about the supply chain issues and the chip shortage? That's got to be a hard thing for your industry to absorb.
So we started buying 6 months worth of inventory, right? And we just did the same thing. So I, bought a year's worth of supply from somebody, right? So that we can grow, install the kind of the new projects that we have, and that we can support the ones that, all of our customers. So I think the working capital, so it was a dynamic that didn't exist 2 years ago. You could wait and you just bought stuff when you had the projects. And now we have, warehouse full of parts, right? So that we can continue to serve the industry. If we don't do that, then, we're stuck.
Do you think you ever get to a point down the road where you have less stuff in the warehouse, or are you going to keep the
I hope
warehouse
so.
pretty stocked?
It's like, I think so. I mean, you read that there's chip shortages, there's the logistics and there's all sorts of things going on. And from our standpoint, it's like, what do you want to spend managing day to day? And for us, we can solve inventory. That's pretty easy. It's just, you guys are business owners. You just spend more money on your working capital and put it in the warehouse. And then your team, right now it's like, really, what do we want to focus on managing? And the uncertainty of supply chain isn't a great, I don't want a team focused on that. I want them focused on serving customers and, and helping people. And yeah, occasionally we have to go on Amazon and figure our eBay and try to find something, but it's a one-off issue, not a, not a business operating procedure, so.
Well, so what is a good goal for a campground owner as far as the guest experience scores? You mentioned that 31% of the properties can meet guest expectations, and that's just meet expectations.
Yeah.
What's a good goal? I mean, is 50%? If half of your guests are happy with your Wi-Fi, is that something that in the market the way it is today is achievable and desirable?
So when we talk to customers right now, it's actually, that's the language we use, Mike. We go, well, if you had a 90% satisfaction rate, would that be good enough? And so in somebody's head, they're like, okay, well, I have 200 sites. Okay, so 90% of that means that, on an ongoing basis, 18 of those sites are going to be dissatisfied. And they're like, okay, well, that's not good enough. So then you go, okay. And so I think for certain properties, the expectation is you're looking at, you got to have a 95+% satisfaction on there, or, and particularly with all the ratings you're talking about, Mike, which is, so for those that are, so if I said, I want 100% of my people to be satisfied, then Ben, we would say, okay, for 100% of your people to be satisfied, you're going to probably need to put wires to your pedestal.
Yeah.
And then everybody's going to plug in, and and then you have kits in your office that are Ethernet kits, and you plug in and that gives them to them. And, and that way 100%, or I have Wi-Fi. Okay. Well, to be 100%, then I need to have some repeaters in my office, because that if someone comes to my office and is dissatisfied, I can say here, and so those are some of the trade-offs when we're talking to operators around, or, you want 100%? Do you want 95? And but that new standard, Mike, to your point. So we've just gone through like, okay, what's the new standard to get to that level? And so that's what we design to, and that's what we talk to customers about. And if they don't want that, then we try to really be clear around, well, that's the impact of that is going to be this. And then we have to deliver it, right? Because then if we don't deliver it, then we kind of broke a promise to them. So does that help, Mike? I'm trying to but that's the language we use, because that's what they're telling us. My guests, I have tons of complaints. All right. Mm-hmm. How do I reduce complaints? Well,
no, I agree with you. I think most of the other markers that we've always used in the industry all this time were up in the 90s. You were successful if you were in the if you had a 96% retention rate on a franchisee contract. If you had, I think in the hotel industry, if you could beat 65% total satisfaction, that was considered really solid gold service out there. And so it was always way up there, and it was certainly higher than 31%. So you're working in an industry that the end consumer more or less is dissatisfied with, that you got a lot of room for improvement, I guess, is the way to look at it.
Yeah, I would I would tell you, yeah, and what happened, Mike, is 2 years ago, that 31% was higher, but the
Yeah.
expectations have now changed.
Mm.
And so, in one sense, it's a moving target. You know, in the hotel industry, right? Generally, best practice is every room has an access point in it, right? And it's under the table.
Hmm.
And you're like, so that's how they solved it, right? They said, okay, everybody has one, and that's just the cost of doing business if you want to have 90+%. And if you don't want to have that, you can do something different. But that's the trade-off.
Do they all these new developments, you know, like we just wrote about Hilton Head RV resort in South Carolina. I mean, they put in an awesome Wi-Fi system, it sounds like. I mean, I imagine that has to put pressure on the older parks that have been in the industry for a while to upgrade, I guess, right? Or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's a competition now. And where does that fit in terms of, you know, the competition? If I have an equally great park to visit and this park has this, and so has this amenity that's better, and you know, and is that better a water feature, right? Or is that better, um, you know, a pitch and putt? Is it a jumping pad? We always tell people, you know, the fastest way to improve your guest experience is on the Wi-Fi, because the
Yeah.
usage of the Wi-Fi is so much higher than a lot of the other amenities. And so, um, you know, and Mike, if you get your KISS scores or MPS scores where
Hmm.
there's only one complaint, then you've done great, right? Because then it's generally about your staff, right? That person was mean to me, or they were rude, or you know, you blew my reservation. I was on site last week, and you know, the housekeeping had a cabin, and they unplugged the refrigerator, so the refrigerator was unplugged, right? And this came and had all these groceries, and so how do you, you know, so how do you solve that? So I don't know. So I would say it'll create competitive pressure where it's needed. And that operator will figure out, like, is this really important for me, for my guests, or is it not? And
No,
if it
and
is,
Wi-Fi really has become a given because it's. I can remember back when KOA was subdividing into their brands of
Mhm.
you know, of Holiday and Journey and Resort. But the one unified, a journey may not necessarily have to have a large swimming pool, for instance. They didn't have to have food service. They didn't have to have a cabin feature in order to fly that brand. But one of the things that was universal across all those brands is the need for Wi-Fi, and it
Yeah.
was something that just had to be there because people demanded it.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, we've talked about it, but I think the marketing around it for a long time was, you know, Wi-Fi was the fourth utility, right? And
Hmm.
but I do think if we tell people, hey, it's a utility expectation, so you're either going to meet it, right, or you're going to have to explain to people that you're not meeting it for some reason. This site doesn't have water, right?
Mhm.
I mean, to use
Hmm.
it doesn't have electricity, right? Or it doesn't have X, and I do think it's pervasive like that. And now it's like, okay, well, what level utility is like an amp? Is it 20 amp, 30 amp, 50 amp? What kind of Wi-Fi do you have?
Right.
And if you can set that type of expectation, you know, I think you can mitigate the, you know, I don't need it, or yeah, that's okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great point. You know, that's a great point because people accept that. People know that if they're going in a campground and they require 50 amp and the campground just doesn't have it, they might bypass it. But or they'll go down to a 30 amp to get by. But if
Yeah.
somebody says, "Well, we have Wi-Fi, but it's kind of iffy," well, nobody markets that way. All it ever says is Wi-Fi available
Yeah,
somewhere.
and I think that's probably where I feel, see, as a communications person, Mike, and professional, that's like that expectation. And you know, there's a lot of, you know, templates and people's websites that just have Wi-Fi, and I think some of those are just, wait, figure out how important it is to your solution or your experience, and be clear with it. But I think it's a lot more important now. It's really reaching that utility thing, and if you're not going to do that, you should say something, right,
Yeah.
or aim for that.
Yeah, because an expectation isn't necessarily having the best internet Wi-Fi out there. It's just if you have crappy, if you don't have, I guess not crappy, but if you have like lower end
That's what
Wi-Fi
people use
service,
on those ratings. It is crappy, right? It's
yeah, if you have lower end Wi-Fi service, just letting them know, and then it meets, when they get there, if it's a little bit better than expected, you're gonna blow them out of the water. So that's
Yeah.
kind of
So I
that's
don't
where
use
it's at.
crappy, right? But I use like, here's what the experience is right now, and is this okay?
Yep,
Because
yep.
this is what people want, and you're here. So, and I think that's being really clear. And I think also just Mike in the sales process, you can't sell equipment. You got to sell this whole this experience in it, because all those things have to go right to deliver that experience from our standpoint. So, but it's really exciting. I mean, so right now,
I'm looking forward to that launch of that
Yeah.
first Tango Internet satellite, and that'd be a fun event.
you're going to ride with me on the rocket that delivers it.
I want a seat.
I do too. I'll wear a cowboy hat, and you wear your cowboy hat, and we'll get Ben, and we'll
Oh,
wave.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
there's two of them in Texas. So, I mean, you go to South Texas or West Texas for
yeah.
those launches. So,
Yeah, you can see him from the South Padre KOA, no doubt about it.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks, Eric, for coming on. Daryl Sisk, I'm sure you know who he is. He mentioned he was great to hear. You're so committed to service, Eric. Miss chatting at conventions,
Oh,
and
awesome.
I don't think I've seen Daryl in a little while. Maybe I missed him at the Arvik convention, but it would be great to see Daryl again from Pismo Coast out there in California.
Yeah, he and I had great emails about here's what I'm trying to do, and he's one of the guys who did it himself, but was very committed to it and continues to be. So it was really fun. Hi Daryl, thanks.
But thanks, Eric, for coming on, and it was an interesting conversation. And maybe I'll see you around at some of these state conventions, or at least in the fall. So,
Well, I'll see. Is it Arvik or Arizona Arvik that's next, or will you be there?
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm going to Orlando here in a couple weeks, Mid-Atlantic.
All right.
So that should be fun. Get away from Michigan, cold temperatures up here. So
call.
hopefully it's warmer. So,
Thank you.
but thanks for coming on, and thanks everyone for watching, and we'll be back next week.
Thanks,
Mike,
everybody.
good to see you.
Good to
Ben,
see you,
good to
Eric.
see you. God bless.